Hi everyone, and today I'm taking a look at Fuji's latest mid-range zoom lens, which everyone's talking about, the XF 16-80mm f4 R OIS WR. It's only for their APS-C sensor X system cameras, and it'll set you back $800 or about £750 in the UK, so it's a bit of an investment. Its announcement earlier this year caused a little excitement in the Fuji community because the lens's versatile zoom range, from a very wide angle to medium telephoto, combined with its constant maximum aperture of f4, which makes it a little brighter than your typical zoomable kit lenses, means that it could be a brilliant all-purpose zoom lens, particularly useful for landscape or holiday photography. It's also not a very big or heavy lens, weighing only 440 grams, and of course, being an XF lens, you get decent build quality, an aperture ring, and a good degree of weather sealing to it. Suddenly, that $800 investment seems fairly reasonable. It all looks great on paper, but let's investigate it a bit more closely. The lens itself is a handsome looking thing, mostly made of plastic but feeling lovely and solid. As I mentioned, at the rear there's a weather sealing gasket, and that's followed by the aperture ring, which turns a little heavily but with gentle clicks. The rubberized zoom ring turns smoothly, but it is slightly sticky to get going, which is a bit of a shame for video makers. Something else video makers should be aware of is its bizarre focusing behavior as you zoom in and out. In these shots, the lens was set to manual focus, and every other control was set manually, and yet the focus is flying about all over the place. It snaps into sharpness only when you stop moving the zoom ring. Ugly. Perhaps there's more of a camera issue in this case. But one bit of good news for video makers is that this lens doesn't exhibit much focus breathing. It doesn't zoom in and out as you change focus, which is always good to see. Another very useful feature is this lens's excellent image stabilization. Here's some footage at 80mm with it turned off and now turned on. As you can see, it's really effective, and it works silently too. The manual focus ring turns very smoothly. It doesn't work with the focus motor all that responsively though. The autofocus motor itself works silently, accurately, and pretty quickly, as you can see here. When you're shooting outdoors and in plenty of light, it's lightning fast actually. When shooting indoors, it's a little slower and less confident, probably to do with that darker maximum aperture of f4. The lens accepts 72mm filters, and it comes with a useful hood. Overall, top marks for build quality here, although that weird focus wobbling when you're zooming in and out is a little disturbing. Okay, let's look at the most important thing, image quality. I'm testing here on a 24MP Fuji X-T20 camera. At 16mm and f4, we see great sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image. Corner image quality is just okay. I suspect that the image here is being stretched to compensate for barrel distortion. Stop down to f5.6 for a tiny improvement in those corners, but that's really as sharp as they get at 16mm, even if you're stopped down to f11. Well, let's zoom in a little to 23mm now for a more moderate wide angle. Good news is, again, the lens is brilliantly sharp in the middle, straight from f4. Corner image quality now is quite impressive really. It remains this sharp at f5.6, but stop down to f8 for a nice little improvement in resolution. Let's zoom in a bit more to 50mm now. At f4, image quality in the middle is just good, but the corners at least look about the same and don't see any deterioration. The good news though is that you only need to stop down to f5.6 to see some really nice sharpness across the image frame. And finally, let's zoom all the way into 80mm. At f4, image quality in the middle of your pictures again is just good, not impressive. Corner image quality is weak, unfortunately. Stop down to f5.6 for a small improvement across the image frame, and f8 is just a tiny bit better again, from the corners and back into the middle. So overall, the Fuji 16 to 80mm gives pretty consistent results for image quality, although sharpness seems to get weaker the more you zoom in. Next, distortion and vignetting. Your camera will automatically correct distortion and vignetting when shooting in JPEG mode, but if you shoot in RAW, then you will see the lens's real performance, which is always interesting to me. Barrel distortion is pretty wild at 16mm, unfortunately, but at least vignetting seems to be under control. Zoom in only to 22mm and that flips into pincushion distortion. Zoom in again to 35mm and pincushion distortion becomes very strong, and it remains this bad at 80mm. So it's frankly a terrible performance for distortion, and after corrections that will affect your corner image quality, but at least vignetting seems to be nicely under control. Now let's look at close-up image quality. The lens can focus as closely as 35cm to your subject. That is great, getting you pretty close to whatever you want. At f4, close-up image quality is just good. Stop down to f5.6 and everything looks a little sharper. Next, let's look at work against bright lights. As usual for a Fuji lens, the 16 to 80 does pretty well here, especially at wide angles. Bright lights don't cause a problem, although zoom in and we see quite some glaring. Finally, bokeh. It's not the first lens you would go to get out of focus backgrounds, but if you zoom in a bit, then you'll be able to see that the quality of this lens's bokeh is reasonably smooth. Nothing special, but smooth enough not to be disturbing in any way. Overall, this lens performed pretty consistently in my tests, and that's what you want in an optic with a zoom range like this. Its sharpness is good, but not spectacular, and actually a little dull at 80mm, but apart from that, its contrast, its colours and its bokeh are all fine, and its build quality is really nice too. So really, if you want a decently performing general purpose zoom lens, or if you're going on holiday or want to do some landscape photography, then this is a real nice option for you, so I can recommend it.